We're reading, and during the Feast of Tabernacles, we're reading the book of Deuteronomy and doing this study on this. Now, why do we do that? Deuteronomy 31:10, as I've said, at the end of every 7 years, at the appointed time of the debt cancellation, or sometimes many verses say the release, in Hebrew it's the Shemitah, during was there too. Jericho was I've been to all of this area. Anyways, the Israelites were at this point when it was written. They were poised to enter into the promised land. Deuteronomy is both Moses' farewell speech, his farewell address to the nation of Israel, as well as it is a refresher course for all the younger generation who were going to enter the promised land, so they would know how to live. They would know how to govern themselves. It was the constitutional foundation for the new nation to be established as a sovereign nation in the world on its territory. See, this is one of the things that's a little bit different when we read it. It has some of these different aspects. On the contrary, there are many people over the years, many scholars over the years who said Deuteronomy was written very late. It was written during the time of Josiah or something like this in the 600s. They're saying it was written maybe 800 years after when the Bible says it was written. But archaeologists have determined very clearly that the book of Deuteronomy has very strong parallels to the type of what they call suzerain vassal covenants of the 14th and 13th centuries BC. You see, covenants were the way that a king bound his vassals, his lower princes or municipalities or subject peoples to him. They had covenants that would regulate them, and they followed a form in the ancient Middle East. And archaeologists have all sorts of copies of these things, and they continue to use this, but the form of the covenants changed over the years, so that by the latter 7th century, we're talking about the time of King Josiah in the 600s AD, that these covenants had changed, 600s BC, these covenants had changed dramatically. So we know from what we have that the Deuteronomy far more closely resembles these older covenants of the 14th and 13th century. As I said, this was written according to the Bible's internal witness of what it says about itself. It was written in 1406 BC, and archaeology would support that. They say that is really the whole story of it. It bears a strong resemblance to what was going on at that time. Now, besides, of course, of what I said, of it being Moses' farewell address, and it was a refresher course for the ancient Israelites, a younger generation, as they were getting ready to go into the promised land and to establish their nation, it was also part of what Moses intended as succession, what we call these days succession planning. Because he was turning over the reins of important basis of why the book is the way it is. Now today, for chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13, they're going to be read and presented in this Bible study by Joshua Patton. And I'll turn it over to you right now to Mr. Joshua Patton.
have to admit, hearing my name, Mr. Joshua Patton, from my father is kind of funny. But I suppose that is my proper title these days. After all, I do have a family of my own now. Well, welcome. Hogsmack, happy feast. This is the third day of the feast, and I will be presenting to you today from the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 10 through 13. So let us begin. How are the sound levels? Good? So, chapter 10, verse 1. At that time the Lord said to me, "Cut out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me into the mountain, and make for yourself an ark of wood. And I will write on the tablets the words that were in the first tablets which you broke, and you shall put them in the ark." And I made an ark of acacia wood. I was actually thinking about this. He's up on the mountain. Man, that must have been some good craftsmanship to make an ark out of acacia wood while he's fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. Just think about that skill that Moses employed here. And cut out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and went up into the mountain having the 2 tablets in my hand. And he wrote on the tablets, according to the first writing, the 10 commandments which the Lord spoke to you in the mountain of the midst of the fire, in the day of the assembly, and the Lord gave them to me. So who wrote on them? It was the finger of God. And I turned myself and came down from the mountain, verse 5, and put the tablets in the ark which I made, and there they are as the Lord commanded me. Verse 6, and the children of Israel set out from Beeroth of the children of Jachin to Mosra. There Aaron died, and there he was buried. And Eleazar his son ministered in the priest's office in his place. From there they journeyed to Gudjodah, and from Gudojah to Jotbath, a land of streams of water. At that time the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and to stand before the Lord to minister to him, and to bless in his name until this day. Therefore, Levi has no part of the inheritance with his brothers. The Lord is his inheritance, according to the Lord your God promised him. And this is a very important point because we look at the Levitical priesthood and that they had no inheritance of the land, yet they did have cities, but they were to dwell within the gates of those who did have inheritance. And we also notice later on in the New Covenant that this priesthood was replaced with the priesthood of Melchizedek. So it's very interesting here because the inheritance was the Lord. Verse 10, I stayed in the mountain, that being Moses, according to the first time, 40 days and 40 nights. The Lord hearkened to me at that time also, and the Lord was not willing to destroy you. And the Lord said to me, Arise, go on your journey ahead of the people, causing them to go in and possess the land which I swore to their fathers to give to them. Verse 12, and now, Israel, what does the Lord require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. I might point out here that this also happens to have a very important reference, future reference, to the New Covenant. And that reference is actually Matthew 22:37. We'll turn there after a while when we get closer to the end here. But notice that the Lord wanted these people to love him. It wasn't just about keeping 10 commandments written on stone or all the different statutes and judgments. He wanted them to love him and serve him with all their heart and with all their soul, body, being. In verse 13, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command you today, for what? For your good. Behold, the heaven and the heaven of heavens belong to the Lord your God, the earth also with all that is in it. Only the Lord has a delight in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you above all people as it is today. And obviously it's as it is today as this was written, but it still remains true. Verse 16, therefore, circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Again, this is also, and be no longer stiff-necked. Verse 17, for the Lord your God is a God of gods and Lord of lords, a great God, the mighty and awesome God, who does not respect persons nor take a bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger in giving him food and clothing. And this is one of the interesting passages here, because we're learning a bit about God's character, the God of the Old Covenant, YHVH. Therefore, he says, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him, and you shall hold fast to him and swear by his name. I also found this very interesting because we know that we're not supposed to swear falsely. But God was actually instructing them to swear by his name. And this is often where you'll see, as the Lord lives, in quote, where somebody would say, as the Lord lives, and then they would say, I will do this, right? And obviously, to not swear falsely means you have to uphold it, because the Lord lives, and he continues to live. Verse 21, chapter 10, he, God, is your praise, and he is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome things, which your eyes have seen. So they saw that. Just remember that. They saw all these things. We have not seen these things. Your fathers went down into Egypt with 70 persons, and now the Lord your God has made you as the stars of the heavens for multitude. And now we're up to chapter 11. Excuse me. Chapter 11, verse 1. Therefore, love the Lord your God. Here it is again. You shall love the Lord your God. I thought this was the old covenant, just a bunch of rules to follow. And keep his charge and his statutes and his judgments and his commandments always. He mentions commandments last here. Love the Lord your God, keep his charge, his statutes, his judgments, and his commandments. Commandments are last of that list of things to do, and loving him is first. Verse 2, and consider this day that I do not speak with your children who have not known and who have not seen the chastisement of the Lord your God, his greatness, his mighty hand, and his outstretched arm. And his miracles and his acts, which he did in the midst of Egypt, to Pharaoh the king of Egypt, and to all his land. And you know what he did to the army of Egypt, to their horses and to their chariots, how he made the water of the Red Sea to overflow over them as they pursued you. The Lord has destroyed them until this day. He's saying, you know, because you were children. You saw this. You were running for your lives. And you saw these things with your own eyes. I also want you to know it says the Red Sea. It doesn't say the Sea of Reeds. And his miracles and his acts, verse 3, he did in the midst of Egypt to Pharaoh the king of Egypt and to all the land. And you know what he did to the army of Egypt, to their horses, to their chariots, how he made the water of the Red Sea overflow them as they pursued after you, and the Lord has destroyed them until this day. And verse 5, and you know what he did to you in the wilderness until you came into this place, speaking of the promised land. Verse 6, and what he did to Dathan and Abiram and the sons of Elab and the sons of Reuben, how the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up and their households and their tents and all the substance in their possession in the midst of the congregation, or in the midst of all Israel. Verse 7, but your eyes have seen all the great deeds of the Lord which he did. Therefore, you shall keep I command you this day, so that you may be strong and go in and possess the land where you go to possess it. And here is part of the blessing here, that in keeping his commandments, verse 9, it says, and so that you may prolong your days, prolong your life, in the land that the Lord God swore to your fathers to give to them and to their seed. So it wasn't just to these people at this time, this generation, the children who came out of Egypt, but it was to their seed, so their descendants. A land that flows with milk and honey, for the land in which you go to possess is not the land of Egypt from which you came out, where you sowed your seed and watered it by foot like a garden of vegetables. So they didn't need to irrigate it. But the land which you are entering to possess is a land of hills and valleys that drink water from the rain of heavens. Verse 12, it is a land which your God, the Lord your God, cares for. So God actually cares for this land. The eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it from the beginning of the year even to the end. And it will be, if you will hearken diligently to my commandments, which I command you today, to love the Lord your God, there it is again, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, then I will give the rain of your land in its due season. I was just watching the Weather Network today and all the crazy things that are going on right now, and how Canada had one of the most costly floods and natural disasters in its history, something like $1 billion in damage. What is that? That's rain not in due season. That's rain out of due season. So verse 14 again, then I will give the rain of your land in its due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil. All commercial products. Canada produces a great deal of grain. We supply grain to much of the world and legumes and whatnot. We feed India with our lentils. It's amazing what we produce, and yet our food prices are so high because we're exporting to all these other nations. They get a great deal. I wish I could get the price that the Indians get on some of their food. But when we do not have the rain in due season, our yields are not as much. And so we resort modernly to technologies and try to produce and increase our crops more and more, without this knowledge of God that he would give us the rain in due season, the first rains and latter rains, if we only listened to him and loved him and did his commandments. And I'm speaking nationally. So, coming back to verse 15, and he says, and I will send the grass in your fields for your livestock, so that you may eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves that your heart may not be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And the Lord's wrath will be kindled against you, and he shut up the heavens so that there will be no rain, and will not yield her fruit. And you perish quickly from off the good land which the Lord gives you. It's a solemn and sobering thought. Therefore, and it's quite a contrast to just earlier, in verse 9, about prolonging your life in the land. Verse 18, therefore you shall lay up these my words in your hearts and in your souls, your bodies, and bind them for a sign upon your hands, so that they may be frontlets between your eyes. And you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when all that you do, you should be teaching your children to hear these words. And you shall write them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. They should be out there. They should be there for all to see who come and visit you. So that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers, like the days of heaven above the earth. I suppose that means innumerable. Verse 22, for if you shall diligently keep all these commandments which I command you to do, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to hold fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all of these nations before you, and you shall possess greater and mightier nations than you. You think about this, about Israel right now, and the greater and mightier nations who were there all around them. And yes, they have dispossessed them. And at this current time, they are being a greater and mightier nation than all those around them. Verse 24, every place on which the soles of your feet shall tread shall be yours. From the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river and the river Euphrates to the western sea shall your border be. And is a good point here is that the children of Israel actually never possessed all this. They didn't actually walk on all this land. They never got that far. The land of Israel right now is very small compared to what they actually did possess at that time. But yet, these borders that God promised them far exceeded that. Up to the great river Euphrates. Look at a map. Open your Google Earth. Open Google Maps. Take a look. It's actually quite, and it's very interesting to note the topography. It is hilly and is very, very dry right now. But it was not always. So, verse 25, chapter 10, verse 25. There shall be no man stand before you, for the Lord your God shall lay the fear of you and the dread of you upon all the land, and you shall tread upon as he has said to you. Behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. A blessing if you obey the God, which I command you this day, and a curse if you will not obey the Lord your God, but will turn aside out of the way, which I command you this day, to go after other gods which you have not known. And it will be when the Lord your God has brought you out, or brought you into the land where you go to possess it, you shall set the blessing upon Mount Gerizim and the curse upon Mount Ebal, as a remembrance. Are they not on the other side of the Jordan, by the way of the sunset? So to the west, in the land of the Canaanites, who dwell in the plain across from Gilgal, beside the plains of Moreh. For you shall pass over the Jordan to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you shall possess it and dwell in it. And you shall be careful to do all the statutes and judgments which I have set before you this day. Chapter 12. Verse 1, these are the statutes and judgments which you shall be careful to do in the land which the Lord your God of your fathers gives you to possess it, all the days that you live upon the earth. And what did he want the children of Israel to do? Well, it kind of goes back to just a couple verses before, to not have other gods before him. You shall utterly destroy all the sacred places where the nations which you shall possess have served their gods, on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every green tree. And you shall demolish their altars and smash their standing pillars and burn their asherim with fire. And you shall cut to shards the carved images of their gods and destroy their names out of that place. Cut off their remembrance. Utterly and completely cut off their remembrance so that God is forefront and the true God and the true worship was only forefront in their minds. Verse 4, you shall not do so to the Lord your God, but you shall seek to the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of all the tribes to put his name there. Even to his dwelling place you shall seek, and there you shall come. And this is interesting because it's quite vague, and it gives us, as a modern church, the church that Jesus Christ built, some leeway in where Christ decides to put his name for the festivals. It doesn't specifically say Jerusalem. It doesn't specifically say any place in Israel. It just says where the Lord your God shall choose to put his name. There you shall come. Verse 6, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your tithes and heave offerings of your hand and your vows and your free will offerings and the firstborn of your herds and of your flocks. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice. That your hand on all that you put your hand to, and your households in which the Lord your God has blessed you. And indeed, we are blessed. We put our hand to many things throughout the year, and we are to come up and enjoy the feast. And you shall not do according to all that we do here today. You shall not do according to all that we do here today, each doing whatever is right in his own eyes. It's so, until the giving of the law, it was basically every man for himself, every man's household, whatever he thought was good. And it's basically what we've gone back to as a society now. But God's saying, you shall not do this, for you have not as yet come into the resting place and to the inheritance which the Lord your God gives you. Verse 10, but when you go over the Jordan and live in the land which the Lord your God gives you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies all around, so that you live in safety. And wouldn't that be quite a thing for Israel right now? It would. It would be quite the thing. Then, verse 11, there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. There you shall bring all that I commanded you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, your heave offerings of your hand, and all the choice vows which you vow to the Lord. You shall rejoice again before the Lord your God, you, your sons, your daughters, your manservants, your female servants, and the Levite that is within your gates, because he has no part nor inheritance with you in the land. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, but in the place which the Lord shall choose in one of the tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. However, as much as you desire, you may slaughter and eat flesh in all your gates, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. The one who is clean and the one who is unclean may eat of the gazelle and as of the deer. And we're talking about the one who's clean and unclean. We're talking about people in their ritual purity. Only you shall not eat the blood. And this is quite a key thing, because many of the tribes, not of Israel, but many of the tribes and nations did eat the blood and used it in their rituals, and also saw it as a way of sustenance, like the Maasai in Kenya. The tribal Maasai, they would tap the blood of the goat, but of the cow and in the neck, and they would mix that with the milk, and that was their sustenance. Verse 16, it says, only you shall not eat the blood. You shall pour it on the earth like water. You may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your firstborn of your herds or your flock, or any of your vows which you vow, or your freewill offering, or the heave offering of your hand. But you must eat them before the Lord your God in the place which the Lord your God shall choose. Basically, don't stay at home for the feast. You are not to eat your tithe and all these offerings before the Lord in your house and within your gates at your land. You're supposed to go up. You and your son and your daughter and your manservant and your maidservant and the Levite within your gates, the priests. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God in all that you put your hand to. So anything that you put your hand to, the work that you accomplish. Verse 19, take heed to yourself that you do not forsake the Levite as long as you live on the earth. Another reminder here, do not forsake the priesthood. Do not forsake the ministry. When the Lord your God shall enlarge your border as he has promised you, and you shall say, I will eat flesh, because your soul longs to eat flesh, you may eat flesh, whatever your soul desires, within the law. And that will be chapter 14, which I am not reading today. If the place which your Lord your God has chosen to put his name there is too far from you, and here's the if. Then you shall slaughter the animals of your herd, of your flock, which the Lord your God has given you, and I have commanded you, and you shall eat in your gates whatever your soul desires. Even as the gazelle and the deer is eaten, so you shall eat them. The one who is unclean and the one who is clean shall eat them alike. So if it's too far, you may eat it. Only, and here's the qualifying item here, verse 23, only be sure that you do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you may not eat the life with the flesh. You shall not eat it, you shall pour it on the earth like water. You shall not eat it so that it may go well with you and your children after you. Indeed, you shall do what is right in the sight of the Lord. Of course, they didn't know back then about blood-transmitted diseases, blood-borne diseases, all this, pathogens. So God was protecting them that it would go well with them and that they wouldn't get sick. Verse 26, only your holy things, again, here's another qualification, only your holy things which you have and your vows you shall take and go to the place which the Lord shall choose. So you're allowed to eat these things in your house if it was too far for you to travel, but you were still supposed to take your vows and the holy things which you have with you up to the feast, in the place that the Lord shall choose. Verse 27, and you shall offer your burnt offerings in the flesh and the blood upon the altar of the Lord your God, and the blood of your sacrifices shall be poured out at the base of the altar of the Lord your God, and you shall eat the flesh. Be careful to observe and obey all these words which I command you, so that it may go well with you, and with your children after you forever, when you do that which is good and right in the sight of the Lord your God. This is forever. It says forever. It doesn't say for a little time. It doesn't say for 1,000 years. It says forever. Verse 29, and when the Lord your God said, or your God shall cut off the nations before you, you shall go to possess them, and you take their place and dwell in their land. Take heed to yourself that you do not become ensnared by following them after they are destroyed from before you, and that you do not ask about their gods, saying, quote, how did these nations serve their gods, and that I may also do likewise, end quote. Don't seek after, the mysticism and the other religions of the world. Seek after God. Verse 31, you shall not do so to the Lord your God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hates, they have done, the nations, to their gods, even their sons and their daughters they have burned in the fire to their gods. Whatsoever thing that I command you, be careful to do it. You shall not add to it nor take away from it. Right? This is scripture. Do not add or take away from all the commandments that he's given us. It's very interesting because throughout time we have had various religions and secular ideas that do involve child sacrifice. We have one today, and I'm not going to name its name, but it is quite prevalent, and it's in the name of women's rights. Chapter 13, verse 1. If a prophet arises among you, or a dreamer of dreams, and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder which he foretold you comes to pass, saying, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them. So the guy tells the future. Say he tells of a great world event. Say it's going to happen in 2017. On September 11th, or whatever it is. And he says, this is going to happen. He writes a book about it. And he's got all sorts of background on it. And maybe it has to do with blood moons. Just saying, do not listen to him, because you shall, in verse 3, you shall not hearken to the words of that prophet or the dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God. Here it is again. Do you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul? I'd like to turn to Matthew 22, verse 37 at this point. Just read this quickly to you.